have on the human body, and how has science fiction influenced us to dream of worlds that we can't even imagine. In this episode of Into the Heavens, we'll explore those questions and much more.
I remember as a child wanting to be able to fly and soar through the air. Being able to defy gravity was a state that offered complete freedom and tempted us with unwarranted exploration. Gravity was more like a chain than a necessity. Aerospace physiologists and astronauts, though, are having a different problem.
But in reality, it's gravity, the force that keeps us on the ground and may limit us in deep space. Let's explore the effect of muscle atrophy, the effect it has on our astronauts, and how Andy Weir's Martian addresses this problem.
During spaceflight, especially in uncontrolled environments, our muscles have a tendency to rapidly lose both mass and strength. This is supported by research in the FASEB journal article Space Travel Directly Induces Skeletal Muscle Atrophy, and references how more exposure leads to more deterioration on a cellular level. This occurs because astronauts are not required to use all of their muscles to remain upright and counteracting the forces of gravity. Muscle atrophy, while not so much of a problem in space because of the zero-G environment, extremely limits what astronauts are capable of on other planets or moons because they are weakened by muscle atrophy, especially after long space flights. In the book The Martian by Andy Weir and in the movie adaptation, astronauts are able to combat muscle atrophy by simulating partial gravity using centripetal force. This element of their voyage is feasible in that if the radius of the craft was long enough, the force created would be strong enough to keep their muscles healthy. Although this would work to an extent, the astronauts would still be exposed to some zero-G environments, inducing muscle atrophy on a micro level. According to authors of Acclimation During Spaceflight, Effects on Human Physiology, an article posted in the U.S. National Library of Medicine on skeletal muscle atrophy. With the shift of fluids in our bodies induced by spaceflight, natural growth hormones and anabolic steroids may cause muscles to weaken, even with artificial gravity. Our next destination, Embry-Riddle, a pioneering establishment on Earth dedicated to the exploration and innovation in the sky and space above. Let's talk to Professor John French about what the human body goes through during flight.
There's a couple of big problems that are facing people traveling to space, and that the primary one is radiation. I mean, that's a showstopper. I mean, what good is it to go to Mars if everybody's dead, or soon going to be, or so weak and so sick they can't move, or that's really a terrible problem we have to solve. And we'll talk more about the solutions to these things later, I guess. But there's a couple of others. The fluid shift that happens. Your body gets a puffy face and the spindly arms and legs. The fluid moves up into your head region. It's called the cephalid fluid shift, and it's just a response of the body to microgravity. Nobody really knows for sure.
There's a lot of different issues and things whenever humans go to space. On a long supposed mission to Mars, what do you think would be the most critical or fatal component that humans would experience first?
Well, radiation is the most fatal.
Okay.
I don't think there's anything. This is assuming that all the engineering works.
Yeah.
You know, that we don't have a foam hit strike or something else that would cause an engineering problem. But as far as people problems go, radiation is the number one problem. It's not just cancer. You know, you'll be lucky if you live long enough to get cancer. Even though it might kill you in 6 months to a year, the big problems with radiation is that it as we've discovered in people from Hiroshima and Nagasaki and other cases in Fukushima and 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl, where people have been exposed to radiation, there's a lot of what are called free radical injuries, where the radiation energy passes through our tissue and just disrupts the normal cellular functions. So the cells that are turning over quickly, you know, a lot of the organs, endocrine, I mean a lot of the, endocrine as well, but primarily the liver and the kidney and heart and things that are highly metabolic, they'll get damaged. So you'll end up with liver damage or kidney damage, and it may be fatal before you even get there.
Is there in bone? Yeah.
there are a lot of calcium regulating hormones that we've got our own ideas here in what some of the projects I'm working on that I hope will provide a solution to not only the motion sickness but to the bone demineralization and muscle atrophy as well through a particular chemical, stopping a particular chemical. There's also, I'd love to test the idea of why not have them wear a wetsuit because it's going to restrict the amount of fluid that can flow up to their head. If you have them wear a pretty tight wetsuit, it'll be comfortable enough for them to move around. Then it's like wearing a rubber band or a fighter pilot having a
similar to a G
advanced
suit.
tactical anti-G suit that puffs up whenever it becomes, he's at risk of blood pouring from his legs, from his head. You could do something like that. I assume it's a slow change, a slow fluid shift towards the head. Why not just put on a wetsuit? Let them move around the capsule that way or the space station that way. So.
During spaceflight, astronauts experience a number of abnormalities that make longer missions difficult. Muscle atrophy, bone demineralization, and fluid shifts are all big problems. The worst enemy, however, could be the bacteria that we bring along.
Immune dysregulation in space poses a significant problem for long-term spaceflight. While in space, beginning around the Apollo missions, a significant portion of astronauts reported having an illness of some kind. For astronauts, health is regulated very carefully on the ground, but once in space, there is little that can be done. To make matters worse, according to a journal article, acclimation during spaceflight effects on human physiology. The immune system is weakened partially because of shift in fluids. This may stem from the human body losing plasma during fluid shift during space travel, affecting the cell's immunity. Additionally, in a study sponsored and published by the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences on how bacteria grows in space, viruses cultivated in space were more harmful and more infectious compared to those on Earth. Between these pairings, bacteria may spell disaster if an infection breaks out on a spacecraft. In The Martian, and in many other examples of science fiction, they don't go into depth in solving this problem. In The Martian and in Star Trek Next Generation, they brush over this technology that allows the crew to combat disease. In The Martian, the crew has a doctor and medical equipment, but the systems on the Hermes is not equipped to deal with pathogens and keep the crew healthy for extreme durations. On the Hermes, this poses a significant problem. The ventilation and filtration systems would definitely be pushed to their limits on a journey of such a duration.
Another problem with going to space is the fluid shift. This occurs when we're exposed to zero-G environments, and many of the fluids in our body start rushing to our head.
According to documents in the U.S. National Library of Medicine, during spaceflight, fluids have the tendency to move towards the head. This phenomenon is not completely understood, but can be the root cause of many physiological effects humans feel in space. According to Sarah Richardson and Alan Hargens, authors on research concerning fluid shifts published in Science Direct Journal, fluid shifts can lead to loss of plasma, interrupt the normal flow of hormones and other vital fluids in the body, and can cause astronauts to experience weakness, lightheadedness once they are on the ground. In the journal article Regulation of Body Fluid, Volume, and Electrolyte Concentrations in Spaceflight, researchers explored the effects that hormones and fluid shifts have on humans to reveal a decrease in fluids on the body during spaceflights that lead to problems readjusting to a 1G environment. Overall, our knowledge is still very limited on fluid shifts, which makes it difficult to treat and prevent their effects. Only further research and more experience will reveal more about this condition. Fluid shift is also not addressed in The Martian. We may be able to assume that the technology has been able to shield us from radiation beyond the Van Allen belts once the crew is on their way, but there is no mention in the book or the movie as to how they will survive the shift in fluids once the problem arises. This aspect still remains unfeasible.
Mars, the red planet. The fastest unmanned spacecraft ever launched from Earth would take 41 days to get here. If a crew was ever to visit, they would most likely arrive with a number of physiological problems with today's technology.
Currently, Mars is beyond our reach, but with new emerging technologies it may not be forever. The field of spaceflight physiology is still in its infancy and discovering new patterns with every manned launch. In correlation to The Martian, it may not be completely feasible, but it has played a key part in motivating us to solve these problems and continue to advance in science and medicine.
I've been your host, Willie Woods, and thanks for joining us on this episode into the network.